If you want to understand what truly breaks a city, don't start with bombs or armies. Start with bread, coal, transport schedules, and the quiet systems no one notices until they vanish. When supply chains collapsed in World War II cities, the change was not cinematic at first. There were no immediate riots or mass panic. What happened instead was slower, more dangerous, and far more instructive for anyone who studies resilience, logistics, or survival. Within weeks, cities learned a hard truth that still applies today. Modern life only works as long as supply chains function perfectly. Once they fail, everything becomes local, improvised, and, well, fragile. In this video, we are not dealing in generalities. We are going to walk through exactly what failed, how civilians adapted, what governments tried, what worked, what didn't, and how this knowledge can still be applied by people who take preparedness seriously. How modern cities discovered they were only days from collapse. By the late 1930s, major European cities were already dependent on continuous external supply. London imported over 2/3 of its food. Berlin relied on coal shipments arriving daily by rail. Paris depended on coordinated rail timetables to feed millions. These were not self-sustaining environments. They were logistical machines. When war began, the first disruption came from transport. Rail lines were bombed, ports were blockaded, fuel was requisitioned for military use, and civilian freight was pushed to the bottom of priority lists. Food was still being produced, but it could no longer move efficiently. This distinction matters. Scarcity did not always begin with lack of production. It began with lack of delivery. Within weeks, perishable goods disappeared. Fresh milk spoiled before arrival. Bread production slowed because flour shipments became irregular. Coal shortages meant bakeries could not operate consistently. City dwellers learned quickly that having money meant nothing if the shelves were empty. For modern viewers, the lesson is immediate. Cities do not need total collapse to become unlivable. They need only partial disruption of transport and energy. Governments responded with rationing not as a moral choice, but as a mathematical necessity. Britain introduced ration books early because officials understood the limits of maritime supply. Germany attempted price controls and centralized distribution. Occupied cities like Warsaw and Paris experienced enforced rationing layered on top of confiscation. Rationing did not mean fairness. It meant predictability. Civilians knew exactly how much bread, fat, sugar and meat they would receive, and they learned to plan obsessively around those numbers. Housewives became logistical planners. Meals were scheduled days in advance. Leftovers were never wasted. Scraps were repurposed into soups, stews and filler dishes. Black markets emerged everywhere, not as criminal anomalies, but as pressure valves. When official channels failed to meet basic needs, informal networks took over. Those with rural connections survived better. Those without them suffered. The practical takeaway here is, well, uncomfortable but important. When systems fail, legality does not determine survival. Access does. Relationships matter more than currency, and honestly, skills matter more than status. Food shortages get the attention, sure, but fuel shortages did more long-term damage. Coal and wood powered heating, cooking, bakeries and hospitals. When fuel deliveries stopped, winter became lethal. In cities like Leningrad, the absence of fuel meant people dismantled furniture floorboards and even books to burn. In London, homes were sealed room by room to conserve heat. Cooking became centralised because individual households simply could not afford fuel. This created cascading effects. Poor heating increased illness and poor nutrition. Well, that slowed recovery. Hospitals struggled to sterilise equipment, and mortality rose without a single bomb falling. For survivalists today, this really reinforces a core principle. Energy is as critical as food. Redundant cooking methods, localised fuel sources, and insulation. These are not comforts. They are, in fact, survival infrastructure. The most revealing phase, honestly, came after months of disruption, when people simply stopped waiting for things to go back to normal. Urban gardening exploded. Parks, courtyards and bomb sites were converted into food plots. Rabbits and chickens were raised illegally in apartments. And skills, once considered obsolete, became, well, absolutely essential. People learned to repair instead of replace, you know. Shoes were resoled repeatedly, and clothing was patched until it just fell apart. Tools, well, those were shared communally. Knowledge passed by word of mouth became more valuable than any official instruction. What matters here is not nostalgia. It's really adaptation speed. Those who adapted early suffered less, while those who clung to pre-war habits declined faster. Applied today, this means preparedness is not stockpiling alone. It's actually mental flexibility, skill acquisition, and local cooperation before crisis forces it. When supply chains eventually stabilized, cities did not revert. Diets change permanently, you know. Centralized planning expanded, and governments never forgot how close urban populations came to starvation. Infrastructure was, well, redesigned around redundancy and control. For historians, this is the enduring lesson. Supply chain collapse reshapes societies long after recovery. It changes governance, culture, and trust. For viewers of Iron Age Instincts, the relevance is clear. We are more interconnected, more dependent, and more centralized than World War II cities ever were. The margin for error is smaller, not larger. If this breakdown of wartime urban survival added something new to your understanding, subscribe to Iron Age Instincts, share this video with others who take history and preparedness seriously, and keep studying the past before it repeats itself.